Look at the cleanse, look at the moves! Faker, what was that?
Faker with a huge play, the QSS.
I can't believe I just saw
he
that!
actually won that duel.
한 가지 박자 선수가 노릴 수 있다고 한다면은 지상은 공조 없어요. 지상은 없습니다.
This is KT Rolster! They're gonna do it! They take down SK Telecom in the reverse sweep!
And Ryu doesn't have to die anymore.
이명 선수의 추가 필살기. 호치를 낼 듯 치르가는 나왔습니다.
SK Telecom! KT Rolster! The rivalry between KT and SKT, two of South Korea's largest telecom companies, is one of the oldest in eSports. Dubbed the Telecom War, it has defined generations of players and shaped the history of entire games. In Korea, the crucible from which eSports emerged, no teams have battled for longer than SK Telecom T1 and KT Rolster. It is a battle that has raged for years, in stadiums, on TV. The Telecom War was foundational for an industry that, while still niche in the West, was already in full swing in South Korea.
e스포츠가 다른 나라보다는 한국에서 정말 빠르게 성장할 수 있는 기회가 있었던 거라고 생각합니다.
한국에서 처음으로 만들어진 e스포츠 문화가 글로벌로 그래서 점점쯤 성장하고 있는 단계라고 보고 있거든요.
For SKT, it all began with Lim Boxer Yo Hwan, one of the greatest StarCraft Brood War players of all time.
자 이게 과연 먹힐 것인가?
필살이죠, 필살 이거는.
원했던 대로 됐어 임요한 선수는.
Boxer was a godfather of Korean esports, and years later people would call him the first bonjour. It's a Korean pronoun meant to raise oneself up that's used to describe a StarCraft player who the community agrees is the most dominant player of his era. Initially, Boxer founded a team named Orion in 2002, and in December 2003 the team's name changed to 4 Union. But in 2004, SK Telecom sponsored the org, and SK Telecom T1 was born. If SKT was built around Boxer in the early 2000s, KT centered around Hong, Yellow, Jin Ho. Created as Raptors in 1998, the organization became the KTF Magic Ends in March 2001. The org would change its name twice more in 2009, before settling on KT Rolster. KT became known for their willingness to spend big money on their roster. Yellow was known for his aggressive Zerg playstyle, and had one of the best ZVTs in the business. He was a frequent finalist in OSL from 2001 to 2005, though he never won. His biggest obstacle? Boxer. Yellow and Boxer's rivalry would become one of the game's biggest, with KT and SKT stars frequently butting heads on the game's biggest stages, even before SKT was founded. And though their lifetime record was fairly close, Boxer always seemed to clinch the matches that mattered most.
안쪽으로 양쪽으로 옮겨 선수 공격해 들어갑니다만 그러나 병력이 턱없이 부족합니다. 공격당하고 있는 태그 디펜스 매트리스를 걸면서 홍준호 선수의 병력을 잡아냅니다.
야 이거 이 정도 됐으면 지지 나오겠네요.
지지! 코카콜라 배운 게임 내
But even as SKT and KT's players competed for trophies in the individual competitions, a new battlefield loomed. One that would become one of StarCraft's most popular and influential, and one that would set the framework for modern esports as we know it. Pro League. The team-based league became one of the game's most popular competitive staples, and the format, which saw both 1v1 and 2v2 matches, would go on to define the Telecom War. The format for the 2005 Sky Pro League was simple. 2 rounds, each with a winner, then a grand final in which the best teams from both rounds face off for all the glory. Since SKT won both Round 1 and Round 2, the top 3 teams from both played in the grand final tournament, but the final 2 teams came down to fate. Played in front of a packed stadium, the Sky Pro League Grand Finals in 2005 was the biggest early competition in the Telecom War. And much like many battles between SKT and KT that were yet to come, KT couldn't overcome their rivals.
넘어섰고요.
네. 그래서 어떻게 싸우고 있습니다. 이러면 뭐 좋아요. 병력수가 선번이면 또 뽑을 수 있으니까 도울 수 있으니까 SK텔레콤 들었죠. 지지됩니다. 그렇게 애를 쓰고 사전에 철저한 준비를 했습니다만은 알아도 못 막는 카드 SK텔레콤의 멤버들 그리고
After the 2005 finals, both teams entered a period of decline. KTF's top players were getting old, and many retired or were forced to enter the Air Force. In 2006, Boxer announced that he'd also received his draft letter and would leave his team for the Air Force. Then in 2007, everything changed. His name is Lee Flash Young-ho, and he is widely seen as the best StarCraft player of all time. He was only 14 when he made his professional debut.
자 나머지까지
네, 뭐 이미 데뷔를 하고 있었기 때문에
네.
프로토스의 지상 유닛은 예, 안
지지.
무섭죠.
야, 지금 김태경을 상대로 해서 한 방에 끝내버렸습니다.
Flash was more than just a young prodigy. He went on a record-setting period of dominance in the months after his first OSL win in 2008, and that wouldn't be the last record he set. Flash was so good that he almost single-handedly skewed the Pro League results between SKT and KT. Where SKT dominated early bouts between the rival organizations, KT routinely got the upper hand prior to the release of StarCraft II and the end of Kespa-era Brood War. KT won Pro League in the 2009-2010 season and in the 2010-2011 season, beating SKT to do it both times. And though SKT did manage to topple KT in 2011-2012 Season 1, Flash's dominance in the OSL, MSL, and other individual competitions could not be matched.
모두 마무리 들어있습니다. 지금까지 게임 연출이고 도마스의
저우가 맞붙었었습니다. 언제나 그랬듯 테란이 승리를 해왔고.
But by 2012, the Korean esports scene was changing dramatically. The release of StarCraft II in July 2010 saw a shift in the community. And though many players continued to play Brood War, the new blood and major international esports dollars flowing into StarCraft II divided the scene. There was one other factor: League of Legends. Though the game had been out for some time in the West, the release of a Korean server was a watershed moment for League of Legends. And with the time of Brood War beginning to wane, both KT and SKT made the jump to League of Legends in late 2012. KT created KT Rolster A and B, while SKT acquired a roster that would go on to become SK Telecom T1 #1. In February 2013, SKT created their second team, SK Telecom T1 #2, later T1K, which they built around a promising rookie named Lee Faker Sang-hyuk. KT were quick to make a name for themselves, with a strong showing in Champions Winter 2012-2013. And both orgs put up strong results in the spring. But they were both on the upswing, and by summer 2013, KT and SKT were the teams to beat. Faker had matured since his rookie tournament, and was beginning to make a case for himself as one of the best players in the world. And the Bullets' talent-filled roster also boasted players who were beginning to cement their legacies. And on a rainy day in August, in a huge field near the Jamsil Olympic Stadium in Seoul, the two orgs clashed in the finals for the first time in League. Though SKT had individual star power, KT were seen as having stronger team play, and they got off to a strong start.
A dominating win for the KT Bullets.
And that'll be it.
That is definitely it. There goes the Nexus. GG! Game number 2 goes to the KT Bullets.
But SKT didn't back down.
Is it a 20-minute surrender? Ryu takes off his headphones, and there it is! A 20-minute surrender in Game 3. SK Telecom. There goes the Nexus, and we are going to Game 5!
It all came down to a pivotal Game 5. With both Faker and Ryu blind picking Zed, KT managed to get a small lead early.
For the wall, Deathmark coming down though. Faker really wants it. Oh, he gets taken down by Insect though. Impact very low, gets exhausted. But KT, the pain train is coming through the river. There's the fear on Impact. He goes down as well. And KT, a good series of events for them.
But SKT would not be denied. And just past the 30-minute mark, SKT's first Champions title was all but secured.
And there goes the turret. There's just nothing KT can do.
No, there's not. There's not. This is SK Telecom's tournament at this point.
But Faker wasn't done.
Like, even though I only have a mat on the floor, I think he's in the bed. Oh, Faker may be in trouble here. Deathmark tries to clean it up for Ryu. Oh, look at the cleanse. Look at the moves. Faker, what was that?
Faker with a huge play, the QSS.
I can't believe I just saw
he
that.
actually won that duel.
I can't
as
believe that
SK
happened.
Telecom
I'm gonna
just
lose my mind.
charges into the KT Bullets base.
The most famous outplay in the history of League was the icing on the cake for SKT. And they completed the reverse sweep in what went down as one of the greatest series of League ever played. It was a new game, but for the rival orgs, there were shades of Brood War's early days. KT were good, but not quite good enough. Because of the way world seeding worked at the time, second place was not good enough to secure KT a berth to Worlds. Worlds that year was SKT's to win. And though they still had their doubters,
All aboard the Korean hype train, SK Telecom G1 for the championship, hands down. I've got my tickets here. I got tickets to the Korean hype train, and I will be giving them out.
Thank you, Monty. I appreciate your SKT favorite, but I think it's more time for a Royal Lucian. Thanks, Coach. No thanks. I'm going with Royal. I'm gonna have to go ahead and choose Royal as well.
Royal Club were no match.
Game 1 of the World Finals is going to SK Telecom T1. Lots of kills back and forward, but it's SK Telecom taking Game 2 in the World Finals. A 20-minute game for SK Telecom. They will be the Season 3 World Champions here at the Staples Center.
SKT returned home victorious and unstoppable. They didn't drop a single game in the group stage of Champions Winter. They swept Samsung Blue in the quarterfinals and secured a rematch against the Bullets in semis. This time, it wasn't close. SKT swept their rivals and cruised through the finals as well, completing what is still the only perfect season in Korean League history, going a combined 15-0 across 6 series. If KT had dominated the end of Brood War, this new game, this new era, was SKT's to claim. They had the best player in the world and a strong enough lineup to crush the game's toughest competition. League of Legends was theirs to dominate. Until it wasn't.
Interesting to note that K has looked shaky in the past couple of weeks, or as shaky as they've ever looked, I should say.
Well, they looked lazy in their
they
match
looked
against
lazy.
Optimus.
Yeah, I feel like Faker's picks have been a bit cocky. They've got a lot to think about.
Fear in the eyes of Faker. That is terror right there. I can't believe we're seeing
SK Telecom K lose a game here.
For a team that didn't lose any games for an entire tournament last season.
2014 was a rough year for SKT, especially the T1K roster. They placed top 8 in both spring and summer, but losses in the regional finals saw them fail to qualify for Worlds. Meanwhile, the T1S roster, featuring the likes of Marin, Easyhoon, Bang, and Wolf, finished 4th in the summer split. Both KT rosters were also unsuccessful in the regional finals. There was no question Faker was a strong player, or that KT could compete. But to some, it seemed like the Telecom team's time had come and gone. League was still relatively young, especially compared to the lifespan of Brood War in Korea. But with an explosion of esports worldwide and the existing talent pool in Korean orgs, the scene had matured quickly.
That's really what separates Korea as a region from a lot of the other regions. We're trying to get there with all infrastructure-wise, but they already have this set. They have multiple sets of coaches.
The Korean teams, they know exactly how to punish mistakes. Can TBA do the same? Can Fnatic, can Cloud9 do the same thing here?
Some analysts still see 2014 as the most competitive year in Korea's history. And it seemed like the game was entering a new era, one dominated by Samsung. But it didn't happen that way. With a huge influx of money into the Chinese scene, all 10 of Samsung's starting players were spirited away by lucrative contracts. Many other players departed for other regions, which at the time could offer contracts larger than many Korean orgs. Dubbed the Great Korean Exodus, it remains the single greatest redistributing of talent in the game's history. 2015 saw other changes, with the abolishing of sister teams and a move towards a league system rather than the tournament format Champions had been running since 2012. Between an amalgamation of talent onto single rosters and the departure of some of the region's most dominant players, it was a reset for the scene in many ways. And both SKT and KT looked to capitalize.
SK Telecom T1, an organization that won Season 3 Worlds, and they still do have Bengi and Faker, so 2 of those, that Worlds team roster is still on this.
KT looks like they've finally gone with their starting lineup, and that will be SKOR in the jungle. And of course, with SKOR's progress in the jungle, should be very exciting to see those games.
A new force on the scene, the GE Tigers, topped the regular season. But SKT's new combined roster featuring Marin, Bengi, Easyhoon, Faker, Bang, and Wolf was too much come playoff time, and they swept the finals.
For the GE Tigers, they made a bit of a comeback, but it may all end right here. A 3-0 for SK Telecom as they push into the base with this 5th Dragon. Bang coming up. Kuro and Gorilla trying to delay long enough for Prey to come back. Smeb joins as well. I don't know if they can end right here. They're going to try Easyhoon. Maybe they'll trouble there. Equalizer. Everyone's Divide goes down. Marin gets that kill onto the support. A double kill for Marin. And now it will end. Smeb getting low. Wolf still up. And there it is. The first Nexus turret down. The second Nexus turret down. A triple kill for Marin. And SKT with top, with Easyhoon takes the 3-0. GG. We'll see you at the Invitational.
KT didn't make playoffs. SKT stumbled at MSI, but regrouped in time for summer. In playoffs, hungry for another domestic title, a surging SKT and KT met in the finals for the first time since summer 2013.
So exciting because of the stories of these organizations. SK Telecom versus KT. It's been a decade of rivalry between these two organizations across games, and we had what I consider the best of 5 ever played in League of Legends history in summer 2013.
But in the end, KT were no match. The rest of the year and 2016, along with much of 2017, would be about one team and one team only.
SKT will be your first ever 2-time world champions!
SKT 3-0'd them in the playoffs on their way to their 2016 spring title.
Another kill for Faker. Looks like this is it, guys. SKT, if they can win this fight, they can win the game. There goes the Nexus turret. Still fighting. There goes the Nexus. SKT just needs to focus it. They do. getting a few more kills on the way, but they're gonna finish it off in the end, I think. Yeah, okay, they can want to keep fighting. Nope, Duke wants it. There we go, SKT going to the Spring Grand Finals. What a match, and it ends with a 3-0 for SK Telecom in the Telecom War.
By summer 2016, people were starting to think of the Telecom War as just a remainder of a bygone era. The fans KT earned with their showings in 2013 and 2014 had become a punchline. To be a KT fan was to know heartbreak.
Want to end the game,
Oh
Achilles.
yeah, they go for Arrow, can't quite finish him off, but they still have 25 seconds on something, 20 on score. They're going to go for this one. The Nexus turret's being engaged on. It's 28 minutes into the game. This would be very early victory here. Achani comes up. Can they finish this? Faker goes for a double band pulverized there by Wolf, who's going low on mana. Duke dashes forward though. They'll be able to finish off the Sivir, and that's going to be the game. Going over to SKT. Very convincing here in game 3. KT having a lead, throwing it away at Baron. And SK Telecom will win the Telecom War yet again.
But after fighting their way to the second round of playoffs that summer, KT earned themselves another crack at the unassailable SKT.
It is definitely going to be a barn burner. Very exciting. KT looking to make their 4th consecutive summer final. SK Telecom trying to keep their streak of victories alive ever since we went into the league format. They have yet to lose a season, first place every single time.
This time, it was SKT that went up 2-0. But with echoes of their 2013 final, KT brought it back to Game 5. And this time, it was enough.
The shield comes through from Faker. He's going to go in deep with the Onslaught of Shadows. Doesn't get punished yet. Actually, is able to make it out. Now the Guardian Angel's going to get popped. Snap back from Duke as he's trying to stick into the back line.
They're on the Nexus! They're on the Nexus, and KT Rolster! They're gonna do it! They take down SK Telecom in the reverse sweep, bringing it back 3 games in a row, and they are going to the finals!
And this is KT's redemption. This is Score's revenge for 3 years ago. The reverse sweep coming back to take out SK Telecom here, and Ryu doesn't have to die anymore.
KT weren't able to defeat the Rocks Tigers in finals. And in classic KT fashion, they missed out on Worlds, while SKT managed to become the first team to defend their world title. KT fans were exuberant for one glorious day, but their win was still a footnote on the year. 2016 still belonged to SKT in the end. KT fans tasted what it was like to topple their demons, and the organization wanted more. So in 2017, they returned to their early Brood War roots. If SKT was a problem, they would bring in the best talent the world had to offer in an attempt to defeat them.
I mean, let's be real. How many teams in the world do you not look at every role and be like, oh, I'd take the KT Rolster player over you? SKT, maybe? Apart from that, not many teams.
Smeb, Score, Pawn, Deft, Mata. 5 of the best players to ever touch the game. KT had crafted the roster to topple SKT. They had crafted it to win. With the return of former Samsung players to Korea and the proven dominance of Smeb and Score in their positions, it seemed like KT's 2017 roster was too good to fail. But it didn't work. KT made it to the finals in the spring split, but were toppled 3-0 by SKT.
They've done it. Less than 30 minutes on the clock. They take down the Nexus. They take down KT Rolster. They put another championship title on their belt. And SKT G1 will be going to MSI.
In the summer split, in round 3 of the playoffs, SKT won a closer series 3-2. SKT won all 4 of their regular season meetings. Then, KT missed out on Worlds yet again. KT built their team to defeat SKT, but they couldn't shake their demon. They were good in 2017, but they were not good enough. Of course, at the end of the year, neither was SKT.
The SKT dynasty is over! All hail the new kings! Samsung Galaxy, your 2017 World Champions!
fans saw 2017 as a failure, despite results that would be incredible for another team. And SKT's 2018 spring split was inauspicious at best. After struggling to find a version of their roster that worked for much of the regular season, they managed to narrowly qualify for the playoffs. But for once, KT entered playoffs with the upper hand. For once, KT had the head-to-head during the regular season. For once, KT were the favorites. KT's season ended in defeat at the hands of the Afrika Freaks. But even though they haven't won a domestic title since 2014, they proved that, with a little help from new additions UCal and Rush, their roster can do what it was built to do: win the Telecom War.
This might be the moment. This might be SKT missing out on MSI for the first time in history.
Yeah, they've got a minion wave coming towards the top side. Tala's just being corralled by Mata, who's on this Shen, standing in front of him, stopping the Poppy going home, and KT Rolster, they've done it! It's the 3-1 victory in the Telecom War of the playoffs, and they're heading to round 2.
KT Rolster eliminate SK Telecom T1 at their lowest position in the history of the LCK.
SKT and KT's rivalry has taken different shapes in different games. Generations of players and coaches have played their part, but each time their players sit down in front of a keyboard to play, there's something else there. An extra boost pushing them to play their best, to be better, always better. In the end, their position in one split or in one tournament doesn't matter. Fans will still pack the studio when it's time for KT and SKT to face off. They'll still scream "fighting" when the game begins. And they will still roar with pride when their side is victorious. KT Rolster and SK Telecom have been jockeying for position in esports for nearly as long as esports have existed. Both sides have won skirmishes, both sides have triumphed in battle. But the Telecom War is far from over.
Thanks for watching. If you want more great content just like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button.